Okay. Government business. Oh, yeah. This House is in session.
Refer to government business, sir.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the moment, sir, we are at approximately 38 hours, 7 minutes out of the 40-hour maximum that has been allotted for the estimates debate. I therefore, given that we have about another 4 heads that we would wish to examine, that I therefore propose and beg to move that we suspend the standing orders for the remainder of today's sitting to allow us not only to examine those heads, but certainly to be able to go into next week, Monday and Tuesday.
Honorable Leader, Government Business. That's specifically 66, 1 and 2.
66, 1 and 2.
The question is that standing order 66, 1 and 2 be suspended. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee. We wish to continue with Head 46, Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy. Who we had? Adrian. Beverly. Call Adrian. You still want to speak? You still want to speak? Okay. Colin, you still speaking? You still speaking? I have you on audio from day before. Okay. Charles Luton. All right. We continue the honorable member from Christchurch West Central.
President, good morning. Madam Chair, Honorable Minister, and certainly the hardworking guys from the Blue Economy. My question to you, Minister, first of all, let me applaud you for taking us Barbadians beyond that line that maybe look over the ocean, called the horizon, so that we in Barbados can get full purchase from what persons may refer to as the hydrosphere, the sea, the sand, the ocean as we know it. And I want to commend you on that job. But what is equally important for me is what happens in the lithosphere, the land as we know it. And I think that what you are doing in terms of your initiatives, in terms of marrying the two, is very important for us as a small country, a developing country, and certainly understanding the worth of your job and your mandate. You have started, and I want to thank here publicly the Argentine ambassador, Gustavo Pandiani, for partnering with you, myself, and the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Security, in a way to bring life and hope to what we call the waste and offal in the fishing industry. It is known, it is a fact, that between 55 and 70% of our fish that we catch is waste, or is referred to as offal and silage. You have started a program so that we could, in a circular way, get full purchase from that fish as we know it. Can you elucidate on this project as it relates not only to your mandate, but to ensure that young Barbadians, persons in my constituency, the epicenter of Christchurch, of course, have a new dimension that they can get what we would refer to as a little dollar from? Can you please expound on this, please?
Thank you very much, Minister, and thanks for your comments as well. And good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
And good morning to the Chamber. First of all, let me say a very special thank you to the Argentine ambassador, Gustavo Pandiani, but also to the FAO, because we were able to do this project in relationship with the FAO as well as the Argentine embassy. And both, well, myself, and as you said, Minister, yourself and Minister Weir, as Minister of Agriculture, had conversations about expanding this particular area. But before I speak to the project, let me just say my thoughts on this circular economy. It is important, I think, for Barbadians to realize and for Barbados to recognize that we are at a point where we really have to start thinking about how we utilize our limited resources, or resources that come from here, or resources that come from international places. We have to think about the amount of waste we're generating. And once we have an item in use, try to find ways to either regenerate that resource, recover that resource. The circular economy really is about keeping waste out if you can. But if you have a resource that is already in use, how could we continue to keep that resource in use so that we get the maximum benefit of that resource? So it moves away from the traditional linear understanding of a resource where you buy something, you use it until its life's end, you throw away everything else, and then everything else is considered to be garbage. It is about looking at the full circle. How could we use everything related to that resource, and how could we keep that resource in use as long as possible? I felt strongly that Barbados should have a circular economy approach. I know the Minister of Environment also feels the same way about making sure that we keep the resources in once they're in use. And that is the approach that we took to plastics recently when we determined that we wanted to ban plastics. The idea is to keep the waste out, but once something is in, how could we keep reusing it? So if you have plastic, could we use it for something else? I know persons in Barbados at one point were trying to make tiles, and other persons were thinking of involving it in the asphalt, and so on, so that you keep something in use. In this specific example, Minister, in relation to the Argentine and the FAO, Argentine embassy and the FAO, what we determined was that as it stands in Barbados, a significant percentage of the fish, as you said rightfully, is wasted. And that there are some studies that show in some cases and on some fish, people waste up to 70%. That is, when you consider they don't use the scales, they don't use the head sometimes, they don't use the bones, and a lot of the flesh that is actually on the bone as we discard it as well. And that there is a view, and that other people have done it, so we know it makes sense, that all of these things contribute to becoming a resource, and that all of these things have economic value. The project with the embassy and the FAO was to look at what we would traditionally consider to be the waste, the offals that is discarded in the market, and could we take those offals and convert them into something else, in this case, silage, and to use that product, that byproduct, to produce animal feed in Barbados, so that all of what was considered waste of the fish then becomes part of the circle and is then being used for something else. And we're using it now to make the feed for the fish, for the animals, sorry. When we had a consultant in from Argentina to begin the initial conversations on that, and then we realized that we wanted Barbados not only to be dabbling in this, but Barbados had to become the center of excellence. So we are now working with CARDI, the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, thanks, to be able to help us with the fish silage. The waste that we were getting from the markets still contained things like plastics and other things. So we're also working with a fish processor at the moment until we are able to specialize, to become the leading example in the world of making the fish silage. And then we're going to expand it back out into the markets and so on, so that we even separate at the markets properly, so that you don't have anything but fish byproducts when we take it from the market. We're going to be in a position, hopefully very soon, to have an example. And once we're able to do that, the whole intention is, Minister of Youth, and I think this is where you're going with this question. Once we've got the science right, and we're very close to doing it now, then we would encourage young people, because it is a source of revenue. It is a source, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition had asked about opportunities for other people and new industries. This is going to be one. It's going to give young people an opportunity to be able to start a business and to be able to use some of this offal to make the silage. And of course, we get to determine who takes the silage, who takes the waste. So we would make it necessary for persons, and we said so as a government anyway, that we were going to give opportunities to young people. So we're going to give that opportunity to many young people to be able to make the fish silage, and then use that as a source of revenue for young people as we go forward.
Thank you, Minister. My second question, we are both in sync as it relates to ensuring that our young people have that space, that productive space. My second question, it is a fact that there is, because of global warming and the effects of climate change, that there has been a rise of our sea levels around this country, Barbados, of 40 millimeters or so last year. If we continue on this current trajectory with the increase of temperature, we are expected to have an increase of sea level of around 10 to 15 inches over the next 40, 50 years. Probably someone from Coastal Zone Management can help us with this question. What is our government, what is our position in terms of providing solutions so we can mitigate this threat to and in order to save our touristic product, of course, and the beaches as we know it from even our locals? What are we doing to mitigate and certainly to mitigate against the threat of sea level rise that we are having in Barbados as I speak?
Thank you again for the question. Dr. Brewster will go into the specifics of the sea level rise and so on. But the reality is, Minister, the Prime Minister has been a shining example of leadership in relation to this matter. I think the Prime Minister has, in the last year, become the leading world leader, actually, in terms of championing the fight against climate change. And why is that important for Barbados? There is a view that, we could handle a 2.5 degree increase in the temperature of the water. I had always felt, even before I came into cabinet, that was the wrong conversation, because most of our fish, most of our coral, most of it is already at its maximum thermal capacity anyway. So an increase in the temperature of the water for us is disastrous. And I felt, and I know the Prime Minister, that's why she championed the cause with the kind of intensity that she has been championing its cause. But I know that unless the developed world changes its ways, and unless those of us who are in small island developing countries come together and make the argument, the same one the Prime Minister is constantly making, that the developed world has to take responsibility for some of the consequences that we're facing. We've said that we find ourselves in the front line of a war we did not start. Every year, we are guaranteed a hurricane of intensity is now 4 and 5, and now they're talking about Category 6 hurricanes because of what's happening in the climate. We are dealing or trying to deal with sargassum seaweed, which we also believe is as a result of the changes in the climate. We're watching our fish stock deplete, we're watching some effects on our coral. So we know that Barbados is dealing with this. Barbados is indeed on the front line. And we've taken some steps to mitigate some of these things. That is why we've banned plastics. That is why Barbados is talking about being fossil fuel free by 2030. That is why, in terms of adaptation, you'll hear us talking about NCRIP and the need for us to build out and build conscious of the fact that we are exposed. I mean, that is why we are having all of these conversations at the same time. I do not think that there has been a government in recent history, not only in Barbados, but in the region, that has treated to climate change with the same intensity as this government has, because we recognize that it is a serious challenge. And, you know, you speak about the changes in the sea, and I'm sure Dr. Brewster will go into all the details about some of the things that we've seen. But I would also ask Dr. Brewster to speak to some of the things that we are doing or seeking to do in relation to the marine managed areas and what that would mean for us, in relation to trying to rebuild coral and what that would mean for us. So, Dr. Brewster, please.
Thank you, Minister. Morning, Madam Chair. Morning, ministers.
Let's go forward, Mike.
Okay.
Thanks.
Morning. Morning to everybody.
All right, morning.
Climate change is real, and we at the Coastal Zone Management Unit have been dealing with climate change since the 1990s in terms of all of the work that we have been doing. Okay? As part of our engineering design protocols, we have always tried to ensure for any works that we're doing along the coastline that it takes into effect things like increased storminess, increased wave intensity, sea level rise, accelerated sea level rise. From the time that the IPCC was created, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was created in the 1990s. So, yes, it is noted that there may have been incidences of projected sea level rise for Barbados over the years, and all of our work accommodates for that in terms of the work that we have been doing. We monitor the beaches, over 120 beach profile locations around the island on a quarterly basis. So we get the overall trends of beach change annually and can look to see the areas that are being worse hit. And those are the areas that are then prioritized as part of our work at the Coastal Unit in terms of areas of requiring urgent action, and those that also then can then be looked at different forms of mitigation for shoreline stability, shoreline enhancement, and where necessary, shoreline protection. Each one of those is separate and distinct in their own description. So for shoreline stabilization, you can do simple things like planting vegetation as a soft option to ensure that your beach and back beach area is stable. And this is the reason why even within our legislation, we try to make sure it's understood that it's illegal to remove beach vegetation from beaches because the rooting systems of the vegetation hold the beach sands in place. In terms of engineering work, which is the harder option, you can look therefore at ensuring things like breakwaters, surface piercing or submerged groins, revetments, etc., are designed to be able to withstand the increased storminess of waves affecting the coastlines without having a negative impact on neighboring properties or downstream. We also have to then look at the other options, which can include now part of what the minister was talking about in terms of once we can roll out the coral lab again, the coral nursery, the means by which you could actually then look to transplant corals that are grown either in the lab or out in the sea on different mechanisms as he identified at the last meeting in terms of either on A-frames or using coral trees or even using a biorock process as a means of further looking to strengthen structures to encourage the establishment of corals onto those structures that are placed in the ocean. The reality is that we are aware, as the minister has rightfully said, that with increased storminess, there's the chance of greater erosion taking place on the shoreline, and therefore the type of robustness that has to be in place on the shoreline can lead to what can be perceived as a hardening of the shoreline. Now, since about 2003, everyone would have been aware of the work that the unit has been doing in terms of the Coastal Infrastructure Program, where we built the Richard Haynes Boardwalk, which has been branded globally as a worldwide trendsetter, especially by the Inter-American Development Bank. It is their pride and joy because they help fund that project, but it also demonstrates how you can actually use hard engineering with clear design work to ensure that you can protect a shoreline and still make it have some level of natural capacity for absorption of significant wave energy. And since then, everyone will be aware that we've gone through several storm systems, and there's been very little damage to that structure over the last 12 to 14 years, with the exception of obviously the boards, which is a lot of wear and tear from the pedestrians on it doing their physical exercise, which is part of the minister's mandate for ensuring that people remain healthy. But in addition to that, we've also done the same sort of work in Whole Town, where we actually did work between the Beachlands area up to the Whole Town Police Station, and then as part of the recent coastal risk management and coastal risk management program, we did from the police station up to Heron Bay, okay, going through Folkestone, especially in terms of retrofitting and redesigning there and creating beaches. All that work has been designed to ensure that the concerns for climate change are recognized and that beaches are protected. We have the unique situation in Barbados where we have a very limited sediment budget. And by that, what I mean is that there's very little sand that actually flows along our coastline. So when a beach is impacted by erosion, fortunately for us, it actually moves off into the near shore, and then it takes its time to come back on. In doing that, it means that sometimes some beaches can look like they've been narrowed considerably over a winter swell period, as like what we're going through now, or after a significant hurricane event, the beaches are very narrow. But then in a short space of time, once normal waves return, the beaches will return back to their near natural position. For all the work that we've done since we've been doing these major coastal engineering works, which includes renourishment of beaches, which is taking sand from one location, either offshore, and then placing it onto the beaches that we have created. We have been fortunate that we have never had to do any renourishment of any beaches, and that in its own right is very unique in the world, because normally when people do beach nourishment projects, within 4 years they have to renourish. Okay, we have never had to renourish. That's the seriousness we take the science to be. Okay, and that makes us very unique in the world in that setting. So we try to understand the coast. We try to make sure that our designs are sound, that they are robust in their design, and therefore we also ask persons who are going to be doing significant work along the coastline to try to ensure that those standards are also adhered to, because we don't want upstream or downstream negative impacts that can destabilize that fragile balance that we are trying to maintain. In addition to that, we also work to try to ensure that wherever practicable, the concept of climate change is transferred onto those that are doing work so they can understand the relevance and importance as to why they have to make those considerations as part of any application, whether it be government in its own right, which is us, or the private sector, to understand the significance as to why they're doing what they're doing to ensure that they understand the coastal area. Thank you.
My last question, comment. Minister, I want to thank you from all four chambers of my heart. You have done something in terms of the ban of plastics and styrofoam, something that can really redefine our way of life in this country. And I see the Member of Parliament for St. Michael is smiling. But we have taken on a lot of the Eurocentric and American way of life that sometimes come to haunt this country in a bad way. When I say this, I'm talking about the new fad that we are faced with as a country. A fad which involved, and it was really taken from a rapper called Pimp C, where he took the double styrofoam container and infused it, of course, with what we call in Barbados the lean or purple drink. And our young people are now using it because they understand science just as good as me or anybody on your team, Minister, who are scientists in their own right. And these youngsters use this product, allowing the seeping of styrene from the styrofoam into the product to cause what we are referring to in Barbados as the perfect storm. Your ban on styrofoam containers is not seen as one that will basically help my fight and everybody in Barbados fight against this troubling trend. But for you, Minister, it helps us to rid this country of an environmental threat, a health threat as we know it. And sometimes out of these type of situations and decisions, the tidal wave of change that we need in a country, it starts to rise up. It's interesting using the word tidal wave and dealing with the blue economy. But it's not a misnomer here today. The change that we need as a country in terms of protecting our environment and taking care of ourselves as a small nation and what is right and what is wrong. I am saying to you and I'm asking you, out of this ban, and then you can expound on the importance for the environment, the health, what's not. But out of this ban, it has allowed the creative gene of Barbadians to be stimulated in a way that only you can be able to tell this country in terms of persons using calabash, coconut, you name it. I want you to tell us and this country today how the ban has affected and has been able to protect this country in terms of the environment, the health of the nation, and obviously what are the new products that have come out since this ban so that Barbadians can see it as a viable economic exercise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I appreciate that I have warmed all four chambers of your heart. You know, you asked two very important questions. I think the first relating to what actually you brought to my attention, and I remember we having this conversation in relation to young people and the abuse of lean and purple drink. And subsequent to speaking to you, after we had that conversation, I actually raised the conversation with my daughter to figure out how real it was. And she, like many of her friends, was aware of this purple drink and this lean. And I must confess that I was not aware of this purple drink and lean, but in your time here, Minister, you spoke about how easy it is to take regular products on the shelf, regular cough syrup and other sweet and Sprite, and make a product that could cause people to get high. It's very simply done. And then you also communicated to me that persons were using styrofoam to intensify or sustain the level of the high. And when we banned styrofoam, it wasn't because of that, I mean, on the other polystyrenes, but it was because of reasons that we've made known before. You know, in life, sometimes you have unintended benefits, and I'm very grateful that in so doing, we've been able to help save some of the nation's children. I'm sure you are very happy to hear that, as well as the member for St. Michael Southeast, who has responsibility for education. The reality is that when we determined that we wanted to ban plastics, it was petroleum-based plastics. And I think I feel that I must make that clarification stronger here. We put in place a ban on petroleum-based plastics. And we only did that in relation to certain things. Things involved primarily for now in the culinary things. So it would have been forks, plates, stirrers, straws, those kind of things, cups, and anything that was made of styrofoam or polystyrene. And the reason for that was because we felt, and it became quite obvious, that because first of all, most of these things were non-renewable, you were hurting the environment, but also in terms of the waste and the consequence of that waste. A lot of these things were ending up in the ocean. A lot of these plastics were ending up in the ocean. A lot of these plastics were ending up in the fish. The polystyrene containers, you know, we came to realize were causing cancer in some cases. And Barbados just took a position as a value-driven country that this is not what we want to stand for. And I think the process of the ban is also very important. And your second question, Minister, spoke about the innovation. I'll answer that in a second. But I think the process of the ban is also very important. We came into office in May. By September, we were having conversations with the persons who are importers of the containers and manufacturers of plastic bags. The persons who are importers of the containers told us at a meeting in September that they needed 6 months to get rid of their stock. so that when we implemented the ban on April 1st, 2019, it was as a result of the conversations and the consultations that we had with the importers, who said, we understand what the government is doing, we support what the government is doing, give us 6 months and we will be able to get rid of all of our stock. Then we set the date for April 1st. It would have been 6 months from September. By April, of course, most people hadn't gotten rid of all of their stock. They'd gotten rid of a substantial amount of stock. So after having the conversations, we moved the date to accommodate the persons who imported the containers. Now, it must not be said, although it has been said, but it should not be said that the government took this date arbitrarily. The date that we chose came from the people who imported the containers, and that we only extended for 3 months to give them time to get rid of their stock. Because, of course, we did not want to cause unnecessary injury to the persons who are involved in the industry. In relation to plastic bag manufacturers, it was the same conversation. They said, give us another year, Minister, and we will be able to adapt our processes to be able to produce a plastic bag that is not from a petroleum base. And so we agreed. We moved the ban on plastic bags until January 1st, 2020. And throughout the entire process, we've been having conversations and conversations. The plastic bag manufacturers have made tremendous strides in terms of adjusting their factories. In fact, they're now using a resin that is accepted in the world as an organic resin, and on the world stage, it's considered to be the best alternative so far. It still, to me, has not gone as far as I would like, but this is not a fresh conversation we're having with the plastic bag manufacturers. But their innovation over the last year has put Barbados in a point where Barbados is ahead of the rest of islands in the Caribbean in terms of their capacity to be able to produce something that could be sold on the world stage. And it's in keeping, for the most part, with biodegradability and compostability. We saw the same thing with the importers. They started importing containers that, for the most part, were within the realms of the ban. But I feel, and I said it recently, that the legislation now has to be enforced, because the reason we're doing this is not to spite anybody, but it is to ensure that Barbados remains a healthy, clean place. If you consider the efforts of the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Public Works and so on in keeping Barbados clean, we also have a responsibility to keep Barbados clean, and I'm satisfied that we're doing well in that regard. There has been a number of positive innovations coming from young people. I spoke last time about the persons who were making plastics from potato skins. I mean, that in itself is transformative. There are a number of people at the university now who are using other organic substances to be able to make plastics. There are some people who have gone to the point where they will not use plastic, even if it is an organic plastic, but using the traditional things you mentioned, the calabash that we used to laugh at, as children, talking about it from the old time days. But that has been the way of Barbados. That is who we are essentially. And I ate out of a calabash many, many times. The food tastes better in the calabash. When I had my Rasta friends give me food in the calabash. But the truth of the matter is, Madam Chair, that Barbados has to go. Some of the things that we rejected as, in my generation, you got to go back to those things. We got to go back to basics, as the member for St. Thomas said. A lot of things that the way that we define development, a lot of these standards that we think recognize that would help us elevate ourselves are really dangerous. And some of the most basic, simple things are what is going to separate Barbados from the rest. People who come to Barbados want to come to a country that, for the most part, is natural, is organic. That is why I think it's important that we eat sometimes from the calabash or something else similar. I saw a person circulating food in Africa that is wrapped in banana leaves. We were doing that with the conkeys for the longest time. So there's just certain things that I think that we have to go back to. But yes, we have to continue to be innovative. We have to be supportive of the young people who are trying to do the innovation. I am thankful to the UNDP. They just took 4 Barbadians and they're working with them now to be able to produce organic products that would help to support the blue economy. So there's a whole strain of innovation coming, Minister, as a result of the ban on plastics. And, I sometimes prefer not to think about it as a ban on plastics, really, but more of a move toward informing this kind of bio-based future that I keep talking about.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. I want to preface my question to the Minister by stating that on Tuesday, I asked a question of the Minister of Culture as it relates to Carrie Festa. I don't have a vehicle now, so I was not driving behind a truck. But I went to the ATM and I found a document that I will share with the Minister in relation to Carrie Festa. My question to the Minister, and I want to commend the Minister because in 2 years, I think he would have done, or less than 2 years, more than what the entire administration in the last term did in 10 years. So in this case, I want to agree that 2 is more than 10. My question to the Minister, we did a tour last year to Concept Bay, and there was a member from the private sector that indicated he wanted to put some resources into Concept Bay. 1.5 earmarked for development at Concept Bay. I want to know, one, if this is to repair or construct a new facility at Concept Bay, and two, he would have also mentioned the number of jobs that are created in this particular sector. And I'm suggesting and asking that the facilities at Concept Bay contain some kind of training facility, a room maybe, that can decentralize the training as it relates to this particular sector, that individuals from the constituency of St. John, and maybe your constituency, Madam Chair, can source training in all of the areas or those particular areas that they can benefit or find employment. So the question is, can a training room be added to the facility at Concept Bay specifically for this purpose, decentralizing the training and providing an opportunity for youngsters in St. John to get involved in the process? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And we did visit Concept Bay together and with members of my team and members of your team. And we looked at some of the works needed at Concept Bay. Concept Bay, like most of the markets, has fallen into a state of disrepair in the last 10 years or so, maybe more. In all fairness, maybe more. But the state of Concept Bay market, as well as the hollow for the slipway, which I am sure the Chief Fisheries Officer will speak to, require significant attention. And while we were there, we visited with a person in the private sector, and to be truthful with you, we are very willing to partner with anybody in the private sector who is willing to put their funds toward helping us build out the vision that we have for the markets, but the vision that we have for fisheries and the vision that we have for Barbados as well. And he had identified a place where he felt he could do some additional works and help build the market. The truth is that the land that he identified had actually fallen on private land. So he had extended it to the point where it had gone beyond what the government had control of. And I know we were to engage in, he was to engage in conversations with the private sector owner to see if we could get it. I know we'd also asked Mr. Willoughby, who's no longer here, the chief, to also follow up to see if we could get a little bit of the land, but it was a little bit more difficult only because the land that he identified wasn't the government's land. A portion of it was. But I'm still very willing to work with him as well. As it relates to Concept Bay, we've just allocated in this financial year, Minister, we've put some funds this financial year for the repairs to Concept Bay, so we're going to do a significant repairs at Concept Bay. I take your point about the training room. I also take the point that the way that we've been operating in markets and the way that we've been operating in fisheries, it has to change. And I feel that around markets could be a hive of all kinds of activity, that we're missing the boat. I'm not a misnomer like Minister Ford, but we're missing the boat in a way because, Minister Youth Ford, because in a way, if you think about it, market should be a hive of activity, and that we lose a significant portion of the opportunity to tell the Barbadian story and to communicate the Barbadian experience by separating the market almost as a standalone, third or fourth cousin. And we could bring young people there to the market And at the same time, we have the kiosk set up, and I know we discussed the possibility of kiosks at Concept Bay. And people are frying fish outdoors, and people are having activities. But the story of Barbados and the story of these various locations is being told at the same time. So I take the point for the training facility at Tent Bay. I think we also have to work with the Concept Bay, sorry. The Honorable AG is obviously on my mind. But he's been on my phone and email constantly about Tent Bay. So I take the point about Concept Bay, and I think we would work with the Ministry of Youth as well to be able to flesh out further programming there. I do not want to limit fisheries or markets to fisheries and markets. I feel that kind of separation is unnecessary and that it hinders good development, and that we have to find the ways where we could partner and where these activities have natural, almost organic positions where they should fit in like puzzle pieces to work together. So perhaps in our plans, Minister, I must tell you that to build an additional room may cost additional funds, and if your colleague in the private sector is also willing to help us there, I am more than willing to entertain it. But I think the bigger point is that we agree in principle that it makes sense. I think I share the same vision with you, that it makes sense, and because we both believe that it makes sense to do that, there must be a way for us to be able to achieve it. We're also doing some additional work at Concept Bay. Concept Bay now has the only functioning slipway, and even that is challenged. So the way to haul out the boats at Concept Bay is probably the only place that we can properly do it, and that is broken. So the chief may want to speak to that, and I know she's free to speak to the other points raised by the minister.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, Madam Chair and ministers. I am Joyce Leslie, the Acting Chief Fisheries Officer, and I'm glad for the opportunity to talk about the activities that are planned next financial year, this coming financial year, with respect to Concept Bay. We do have an allocation of 1.5 million, and this is to address improved facilities for the safe haul-out and parking of fishing boats there at Concept Bay in the boatyard. In about 2006, we had acquired a hydraulic boat lift, which is used for the first time for lifting out boats out of the water. Previous to that, our traditional method of hauling boats was dragging on the sand using a tractor. And therefore, the hydraulic lift was able to lift the boats out safely and not having them to drag on the beach, because we've had over the years, depending on the condition of the boats, we've had damage done to vessels as a result of the dragging on the sand. So it was a step forward in terms of improving the facilities. Luckily, the beach there at Concept Bay is relatively firm, and initially we did not have in place a proper slipway in order to use the hydraulic lift. But we had transported some concrete slabs from Tent Bay to the site to provide a smooth path for the equipment to roll on, but that has deteriorated over the years. And now we really want to have an in situ proper slipway there to facilitate the smooth entry and exit of equipment and boats into and out of the water. So the resources are to put in a proper slipway facility. We do also need a small revetment on the other side of the slipway. And also the resources are to grade the boatyard, which is currently a compacted marl fill. When there is heavy rain, we do have inundation in the boatyard, etc. And sometimes the vessels can get stuck in that softened marl when we're trying to move them out. So in general, to provide a hardened surface for the boatyard, parking areas, utilities will be improved where there'll be adequate watering facility for the parking of boats and easy access to them, and in general upgrade the area there in the boatyard and the slipway. Part and parcel also, we're going to, currently there's a small covered area where the fishermen gather and play dominoes. So we're looking to put in a decent area for them to operate, as well as to put in some some facilities to store, for example, nets and so on, some cupboards, etc., lockers for them. So basically, in essence, that is what the funds are to supply. And we're able to have, at this stage, pretty advanced in terms of what we're going to do. The detailed engineering drawings are being prepared, and the bill of quantities to go to tender. The application for improvement has already been submitted to town planning. So we're really hoping to hit the ground running 1st of April in terms of that development. In terms of training, I understand the need for training. Of course, the Fisheries Division building itself does have fair amount of space for training, and we have been conducting training there for not only fishermen and vendors, but, and yes, there's a need for other satellites areas where we can do training. For example, in Speightstown, the fish market there upstairs is a very large room upstairs where we conduct and able to have meetings and conduct training there as well. So there is a need for that on the East Coast. What I would like to say is that when the development at Consett Bay moved from a fish shed to a fish market, even when we were doing training for those persons in the new facilities, we were able to actually use the facility itself to conduct the training. So we're not necessarily constrained with the fact that if we want to do training at Consett Bay that we can't do it, because it isn't 12 months of the year that the actual processing rooms and so on is being utilized, and there's quite enough space in there for hands-on training and so on. But we do recognize also that the area where the fishermen, where they congregate and gather, that is also quite an adequate space for if we want to conduct open-air meetings or workshops. That facility, improved facility, can also be utilized. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I want to come back because when we did the tour at Consett Bay, and I hope, because the officer is mentioning that engineering drawings have already been prepared, but I sincerely hope that local knowledge is taken into consideration as it relates to the siting of this facility, because when that tour was conducted, it was made abundantly clear that the current location where the fishermen now congregate was inadequate to construct such a building. A location to the northern side of the facility was identified as the best or the better location of the two to construct this facility. So I'm hoping that with these drawings that local knowledge was taken into consideration as it relates to siting and what is happening at Consett Bay, because it makes no sense to construct a facility at the location that the fishermen and those who ply the trade believe is in the wrong location. And they would have indicated that this particular area at the north of the current complex would provide adequate sighting of what is going on as the boats come in to dock. So I really would hope that, like I said, local knowledge and the fishermen at the location were consulted prior to submitting these drawings.
Thank you, Minister. You don't have to hope too much, because the drawings that are being done are for the slipway itself. They're not for the physical development. That hasn't been done yet. So, yeah, so where they're playing dominoes, we would also have to update those, that as well as the market, but those drawings aren't done yet. The drawings that she was speaking to specifically, the engineering drawings, were the slipway and the boatyard. So that is where, you know what I mean, where the actual haul out. But the actual facilities that you're speaking of, too, I recall that they said specifically that they wanted to be on that hill. They wanted to have a lookout, and so that would be part of the consideration when we do it.
Minister, sorry, just
Before you move on, I have a question. It's not my constituency, but I have constituents working down there. Is there a plan to increase the staffing? Right now I have a constituent / patient / friend that you would probably have met her, that right now she's doing the acting supervisor, but she also gives out the ice, she also takes the money, she also does cleaning because of lack of staff. Is there a plan to, and security is an issue down there as well because she works probably into dark depending on the time of year. Is there a plan for more staffing and security?
You know, Madam Chair, the truth is, all over the fish markets, I would love more staff.
Yes, but this is an area, you know Concept Bay,
Yeah, but I'm
and
gonna ask
she's
you,
alone down there.
I'm going to ask you, Madam Chair.
Often, sometimes she asks her husband to keep her company. That is urgent. I mean, regardless of what we say about money and staffing, you can't leave a lady down there on her own with a bunch of men or nobody at all.
Madam Chair, there's supposed to be support staff in all the markets. I would have to explore as to why there's none. And if it's a case of security and lighting, because lighting was an issue when we visited, we would also make sure that there is additional lighting. But we'd have to look at this case, and security, but we'd have to look at this case on its particular merit. You want to say? I'd let the PS address this, but the truth is, Madam Chair, across the markets, and I mean the general point is, across the markets, I would love more staff. Seriously, and it's not about Concept Bay specifically, nor am I trying to play down her situation. Across the markets, I would love more staff because we have cases where people have to double up and do 2 and 3 different things, as may be the case as at Concept Bay. But I'll let the PS speak specifically to some of the.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Sonia Foster, Permanent Secretary. And good morning, everybody. The issue of the markets and staffing at the markets is very urgent. We did meet with all of the, I don't want to say managers, but those who are working at all the markets recently, and they did identify a lot of urgent needs pertaining to each and every market. And we intend to meet with the Ministry of Public Service very early in the new financial year to see what we can do to add staffing, but it is really very urgent. And in this case, I remember being spoken about because, as I said, there's only one person. And that's the reason why in some cases they have asked permission to close the markets early so that they can leave because of, as you said, going into darkness and they're there alone. So we are looking at this very intently. We need to meet with them again. And we will also meet with, as I said, the Ministry of the Public Service very early in the new financial year to see what can be done to add staff, and even if we have to pull them from other areas of the public service. But it is very, very high on our agenda at this time.
Thank you so much. Honourable Member?
Yes, Madam Chair. Again, I just want to put some emphasis on the fact that the individual from the private sector, because of a vested interest, is prepared to construct a facility at Concept Bay. So I would hope that the ministry totally embrace his offer going forward. Thank you.
Let me just reiterate, Minister, I am more than willing to where private sector personnel are willing to help us build out, I am more than willing to engage and make sure that it happens. So let us organize a meeting, hopefully next week or week after, where we meet with him again and see what can be done, and see if we can get this done in the shortest possible time, recognizing the constraints, obviously, because some of the land didn't exactly belong to the government.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very, excuse me. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would want to begin by complimenting the vision of the Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, in creating a portfolio such as this one. I think it speaks to vision, and it helps us, not just as parliamentarians, but also as a country, to focus on this important resource that we have, the marine space, the sea around us. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Minister and Ministry as it relates to the Speightstown Fish Market and the good work that has been done on that market. We look forward to the kind of marking the renovation sometime soon. But I really want to thank the Fisheries Division of the Ministry for that. Now, I have a couple of questions, well, a number of questions. I can only ask a few at this point. One has to do with the marine protected areas. And I, in a previous life, would have been involved in discussions on that matter. What I want to find out from the ministry is how is that expected to work? Both in terms of, I think we got a bit from Dr. Brewster in terms of what will be happening in the space or in those spaces. But my question has to do with administration and the financing of it, especially as we are speaking to estimates of expenditure. How is it going to be financed? What is the structure that's going to be put in place for governance, for monitoring in that marine space for the protected, those marine protected areas, recognizing how important it is? Because I have a fishing community in Six Mains that to some degree relies on supplies of fish. Well, fish, lobsters, other things. But so we understand that those marine protected areas are important. How are they going to be managed and financed? And is there any public relations that is going to be done to assist in the process? That is my first question.
Thank you, Minister, for the question. First of all, also thanks for the comments about the work we did at Spitestone. I think Spitestone Market now looks extremely beautiful. And I also want to commend the team in markets as well as fisheries for the work that they did at Spitestone. The truth is that we're working steadfastly on repairing all of the markets one by one because the state in which we found them was deplorable. And we made a commitment that human beings should not have to go to work in conditions, the conditions the markets were in. So I thank you for your comments, but one by one, we're going to repair all the markets, and certainly within the next 2 to 3 years, most of the significant work at all the markets would have been done. So thank you. In relation to the marine managed areas, we chose in Barbados to say marine managed as opposed to marine protected. Marine protected areas sometimes may give the impression that there can be absolutely no fishing or that there's going to be a tremendous restriction on the number of activities in the area. But before I speak to that, I think we need to zoom out a little bit even further, Minister, and realize that Barbados still doesn't have a marine spatial plan. And I think that's going to be very important. We are working on having one done. We'd hope, as a result of the debt swap, to have had one done, whereby we would isolate almost geographically which areas would be allocated to what activity. So we'd know which areas would be the marine managed areas, which areas would be allowed for exploring, which areas for mining, and so on. Different areas as part of our marine spatial plan. A marine managed area for us is extremely important. The truth is, when you watch programs on TV, National Geographic and all these programs, most of what you see, even if it is on land or in the ocean, most of where you see the life is in areas that are protected. A lot of what we grew up watching on TV and Lorna Green's, I think it was Lorna Green, New Wilderness, and National Geographic, all these things, these are protected areas where you have to protect wildlife from human beings, from the activities that we engage in, because our own pursuits sometimes can be injurious to other ecosystems. And we've seen now in the marine space that most of the life that is continuing is continuing in marine managed areas or marine protected areas. Because left to our own devices, human beings will overfish, they will destroy, they will pollute. It's been devastating, the impacts. Somebody, I think Minister Cattle, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, sent me a video this morning of Scotland, whereby they were speaking of the marine protected areas in Scotland and how that has saved wildlife. It has also allowed the seaweed to grow, which then has a role in reducing the carbon dioxide levels. We saw in New Zealand the exact same thing where there were marine protected areas, and you compare the life inside the marine protected area that is like an oasis and like fertile to the life outside of the protected areas where it is barren and dead. And you can see that in a few years, the sea life is resilient. In 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, most of these things have the capacity to replenish themselves. And so we felt it was important for us to be able to establish a marine protected area, a marine managed area. There was already one at Folkestone that wasn't properly managed. We properly designated Carlisle Bay. The cabinet has agreed already for there to be 2 marine managed areas. We're going from Fitzvillage to Weston in the first instance on the west coast, and from the Pierhead to Rockley in the second instance on the south coast. And that would allow us to be able to manage what activities occur there. We put out an expressions of interest where we encourage persons to come and help us manage the space, because it has been our intention that we have to be able to do a lot of these things without increasing government expenditure. And therefore, the relationship that we sought was one where we would co-partner with an NGO who has the expertise and the capacity to be able to help us manage that space. And we received 2 very comprehensive responses. We've now sent out for RFP where they're going into more detail about how they're going to help us manage out the space. But it's important for us to say that we do not intend to incur debt as part of this. The other thing is that we just had a meeting with the BHTA. And in the meeting with the BHTA, they also expressed an interest, BHTA and other people actually, but they also expressed an interest in helping us manage the space. And they expressed the willingness to put some funds toward managing that space. I said during my opening that all the studies have shown that tourists are willing to put money toward managing areas that would lead to the protection of the marine space as well. So the possibility for funds are there. And then, of course, when people are coming into the park, the marine protected areas, then you can have an opportunity to generate revenue by charging a small fee. So historically, when you look at these marine managed areas, they have a way of being able to raise revenue. But I think some of the activities that we do there would allow us to even generate more revenue. I know that tourists want to be able to see coral reefs. I believe that if we do this, we'll be able to help save the coral reef. They want to be able to see different fish. They'll be able to see that because the fish replenishes itself in the space. In terms of its management, we have spoken, Cabinet had already determined that the staff at the NCC who have responsibility now for the park at Folkestone the marine park only, not the full park, the marine park at Folkestone would join the ministry to help us manage that part. We know there's been a comprehensive paper, Dr. Brewster, I'm sure could speak to it and will, where we were looking at getting additional personnel to come on board to help us manage the marine space. The truth is, one of the most fundamental things that I think I will have the opportunity to do as minister is to be able to bring these marine managed areas to life. The world has made some big commitments. The world has said that they wanted at one point to have 20% protected by 2020. They're now saying they want to have 30% protected by 2030. Barbados wants to also to have managed areas significant enough to be able to make a difference. In New Zealand, for example, and I'll let Dr. Brewster speak now. In New Zealand, for example, what we saw was a marine managed area that was so small, it was less than, I think it was 0.0 something% of the overall marine space, very small. But because of the way they've been allowed to deal with that space, when they did their studies, that little space, almost insignificant in the whole scheme of things, is responsible for 11% of all the fish life in all of New Zealand. Because that little space is so well managed because nobody can go and take the fish from it, and the fish replenishes itself, and fish are not going to stay in the space. They then go out and they're allowed to reproduce. So that little space is allowed to produce 11% of the new fish life in New Zealand. I believe that sometimes you have to save people from themselves. I feel that for us it's going to be essential that we do these marine managed areas, that we allow the fish and the coral and just the ocean an opportunity to replenish itself. But Dr. Brewster might be able to speak to some more specifics.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks for the question. Now, the issue with the marine managed areas has been a long-standing one. And as we have rolled out this program since the creation of the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, we've been looking to see how best we can implement this initiative in the short, medium, and long term. As it stands right now, the only really designated marine protected area on the island is Folkestone, the Folkestone Marine Reserve. Okay? The other designated area is Carlisle Bay Marine Park. Within the boundaries of both those areas, there's supposed to be no fishing, okay, because they are protected areas or they are reserve areas, restricted areas. So therefore, there's no fishing within the existing boundary of Carlisle Bay Marine Park, which is literally in front of the Esplanade on Bay Street. Okay, it stretches almost from the area by the Yacht Club up to the end of the Esplanade at Bay Street. It's a very small area within the entire Carlisle Bay area. And then the boundaries of Folkestone are Sandy Lane to Heron Bay, right? I think that when we have now looked to expand the boundaries of the marine managed areas, and let's not get the two confused. When you're dealing with a protected area, you're literally dealing with the prohibition of certain activities from taking place in there, as well as the well-regulated management of activities taking place in there, in the same space. So you can prohibit certain things from taking place within the boundaries, such as fishing or motorized craft activity, or absolutely no activity taking place at all within a protected area. Within the managed space, the intention is really and truly to ensure that there's more effective management of the activities that go on in general. But within a managed space, you can have protected areas where no fishing can take place. So as it stands right now, even though the fact that the boundary of the West Coast Marine Managed Area has been extended from Fitzvillage up to Weston, the area that is designated as the Folkestone Marine Reserve will still be a no fishing zone, because that's what it is designated under legislation now. That does not prevent fishing from taking place in the other areas that fall within the managed space. What would happen is that you're looking to ensure that there are more effective ways of managing and protecting the resources that are therein. So one of the biggest problems we have is artisanal spearfishing, where we find some persons going and just shooting reef fish for sport, not for major consumption, say for themselves or their family, just for sport. And in doing that, you're losing a lot of very young juvenile fish in doing that as well. And because we have very restricted numbers of fish on the fringing reef, they're moving out more to the bank reefs now, where you can get larger prey sometimes. And they're also doing it within the Carlisle Bay Marine Park. We've had reports of that, okay? So we don't want any fishing in the protected areas. But what we do want to see is a more managed approach. Now, in 2006, at the conclusion of the Access study, which was led by the Ministry of Environmental Special Projects Unit at the time, which then became the Natural Heritage Department, the Access consultants were able to come up with a creative and constructive mechanism for creating the managed areas. And in doing that, that has been the procedure that we've been literally following throughout this whole process. So the boundaries and the conditions of what can take place within the identified spaces for Weston to Fitzvillage have already been identified, and for Carlisle Bay pretty much have been identified. There were many participants in that process because it was the first time that we had the most consultative, roundtable, discursive approach towards shoreline management and conservation management of the marine space, including several persons from the fishing sector, both individual and Barnufo and other, at the time, fisheries stakeholder groups, because the Western fisherfolk community was involved, and I think also some of those that were based at Fitzvillage was also involved. Coming out of that study, especially on the West Coast, we were able to find that the Western fisherfolk community had identified that they wanted to have their own fisheries management zone where they were going to take responsibility for a certain section of the coastline that stretched from Weston up to the area of Lower Carlton in terms of how they were going to manage their own resources within that space. That is all documented. We are taking this to the next level now. As part and parcel of that whole report, there were identified mechanisms for funding. There were identified mechanisms for the establishment of the roundtable consultation. But most importantly, it was the need for the strengthening of what was going to be deemed to be a marine parks unit. Now, as part and parcel of the structure at the National Conservation Commission, there was a marine unit that was based at Folkestone that was responsible for the patrolling of the Folkestone Marine Reserve, right? Now, in establishing two marine managed areas and not just 2 small parks or reserves. It is going to be essential that you have to have enforcement on the water within the boundaries of the reserves or marine managed areas that you're establishing. Not just the protected area, but the entire managed space that you're looking at. So there will be a need for 2 units to be operating, because 1 unit operating at Folkestone will not be able to cover the South Coast. Okay? So we have to look at that structure. Fortunately, the ministry has been very proactive, and we have actually drafted some legislation that we now have to send on to the Chief Parliamentary Council for review that looks at how a marine parks unit can be structured, the role and responsibility of that unit, the type of activities that it will be responsible for, and how it would then be able to manage the space effectively. Within that construct as well, it also looks at the establishment of an advisory committee, which will be drawn and following the same procedures as established under the Access study, whereby you will have roundtable representation from not only NGOs, but also the key stakeholders that are involved within the managed space sectors. And that does not then speak to the co-management approach that the minister referred to, where an NGO would be responsible for the commercial day-to-day operation of the marine space. Okay? That therefore results in government having the enforcement and legislative responsibility for the management of the space, as would be required to ensure that the assets that are within the marine space are retained under the control of the government, but the commercial day-to-day activity would then be managed by the NGO entity. And the legislation has a section on it that looks at how a co-management structure can be established and what that role and function of that entity would be within the structure of the managed space. In addition to that,
I want to remind you that the answer should really be 3 minutes.
well, the type of questions that are being asked require
You could
some
wrap up
detail for
there.
understanding.
We'll find a way to answer the other follow-up question.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the response. I think it was fulsome, and I'm satisfied that we are really approaching it in a very collaborative and constructive manner. A related question, and again, this speaks to the fact that we're talking about estimates within the context of not having all the resources that we need. Is there any collaboration that we are benefiting from as it relates to our association with McGill University? Because we know McGill University has, I don't know if it should be called a unit, but there's something going on at Folkestone, has been for a number of years. Is there any collaboration with McGill that we are benefiting from as a country in relation to the whole matter of the marine managed areas and protected areas?
Hi, thank you very much, sir. The reality is that the McGill field station is exactly what it is, a field station for the McGill University, and therefore students come down and postdoctorate fellows come down from McGill to pursue activities in the marine space once they have received the necessary research permits from the government. Okay, we've now instituted that policy for about the last 5 to 7 years, whereby we try to keep track of the type of research activities that are ongoing. In the past, when there was a much closer relationship with the government and the University of the West Indies, there was a close relationship with McGill University based at the field station directly, not with the university. Okay? So the university uses the field station as exactly what it is, a field station for research for its students. We, as Coastal, do have a close relationship with the undergraduate program, and up to this week, there's actually a field team visiting, performing their annual undergraduate visit to Barbados to look at aspects of small island coastal management issues, which we are involved in as part of that process. But other than that, in terms of the research components, the Coastal Zone Management Unit is not directly involved in that anymore as it used to be when it was under Barbadian management.
I must say, Minister, I must say on the same point, we cherish the relationship we have with McGill. As a matter of fact, when the Prime Minister and myself were in Canada, we visited McGill University, and in the course of the conversation, we determined that we wanted to partner even closer with McGill than we had traditionally. And the Consul General there has the responsibility now for helping us to fine-tune the nature of this relationship. So hopefully very soon we will be signing an MOU with McGill University to be able to partner and do some more of this kind of work. When we were there as well, some of the students, unknown to us, unfortunately, some of the students were doing work not only in the marine space, but they were doing work in relation to, I think it was black belly sheep and different things, just fantastic, transformative work, but that it hadn't been brought into the government necessarily. And we felt that that was an opportunity that had gone wasted, and so we now have to deepen the relationship, because if we could get the students to be able to do continue to do some of the work that they've been doing, and then the government benefits from it, then obviously that is part of the relationship that we are seeking to build out. But for us, McGill University, we would actually like McGill to be able to expand its reach in Barbados and be able to offer even more advanced participation and result generation in some of these areas. So for us, deepening the relationship with McGill is going to be a big part of our focus in this year.
Thank you very much. My final follow-up, and this still really...
Final. You're on number 4 now.
Number 4?
Carry on.
I spoke to marine managed or protected areas. I use the wrong word. Then I spoke to McGill University.
The time you take to do that, ask the question.
Yeah, I just want to be very clear, though. I just really, really want to be very clear. My final question, whatever the number is, speaks to Coastal Zone Management Unit. And I know, again, from a previous life, the work done, I think it was very good work as well, done in the whole town cell that Dr. Brewster referred to. We know of the work done at, is it Welch's? I think it was Welch's. And Dr. Brewster also spoke to the boardwalk. My question is there in the pipeline, given the changes we see on our coastlines from time to time, is there anything in the pipeline? I'm not sure. I didn't see anything specific in the estimates for this year, but estimates for the next financial year, either in that or future, to any other areas that may be of concern to the Coastal Zone Management Unit. Any plans for the future, that kind of conservation, building out, rehabilitation kind of work?
Thank you, Minister. As part and parcel of the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program, we are already looking at 5 other areas for additional design work to be done. And as part of that project, we are looking at the area between Sherman's to Clinkits, which is a major coastal road protection works and shoreline stabilization activity there. We're also looking at the area between St. Peter's Bay and Mullins as another area where extensive work has to be done. We're looking also at the expansion of the boardwalk from Rockley to St. Lawrence Gap, and also looking at Oistins in the Bay Garden area, heading back towards Miami Beach as another location that is in need of urgent work and stabilization. So those are the new projects on track.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm glad perhaps that Dr. Brewster is up front right now, because maybe my questions relate more specifically to his area of expertise. One of which is, what about the enforcement of coastal zone management related legislation relative to marine pollution coming from shipping activities, hotel sector related activities? And I particularly would like to hear you say something that will allay the fears of Barbadians, or the concerns, let me mute that a bit, allay the concerns of Barbadians with reference to the outfall of sewage into the South Coast waters. Because whereas we appreciate the work to remedy the bad situation existing there some months back, there is always a query with respect to the negative impact upon the marine area in the South Coast, where the outflow from the sewage operation at Christchurch is concerned. So I'm asking about the enforcement of the legislation relative to coastal zone management as it has to do with shipping movements, shipping activities, hotel sector-related activities, and the outflow or outfall from the sewage project on the South Coast.
Thank you, sir. As it speaks to shipping-related activities, the Marine Pollution Control Act, which is managed by the Environmental Protection Department, does not necessarily speak directly to that, but it does characterize Class 1 and Class 2 waters around Barbados, being the nearshore and the offshore zone. And we would normally follow the directives of MARPOL as it would speak to shipping-related pollution activities. So we do understand, even as part and parcel of the redevelopment of the shipping legislation and the MARPOL acts to meet the IMO audit, there will be some upgrades to that legislation. As it speaks to hoteliers and their disposal of effluent, generally, as part of any town planning application, it is normally mandated that from our end at least, that the minimum level of treatment for hotels and large establishments should be at least to secondary treatment, which is to ensure that the overall nutrient loading is reduced prior to discharge, and it's normally then discharged to a septic tank or a soakaway or a well, okay? And we normally would try to ensure also that the well or the discharge point is located as far landward away from the seaward side of the property as possible to allow for greater diffusion if there's going to be any overflow, etc. In absence of that, it is normally mandated as well that where possible they're supposed to hook up onto either the Bridgetown sewage system or the South Coast sewage system. So in the other situation, West Coast properties would normally have to have at least a minimum secondary sewage treatment facility on board. With respect to the South Coast sewage treatment plant's outfall, what has happened is that since the major incident that happened a few years ago, there's been extensive work done on the placement of that outfall as a temporary outfall for now, and has been well managed through the Barbados Water Authority and the Ministry of Water Resources and Energy. And as part of being one of these subcommittee members for that work, it is clear that they have been dedicated to try to ensure that the marine environment is preserved. Extensive studies, once again, were done on the selected placement of that outfall, and I am very confident in terms of where that temporary outfall has been located along the South Coast for now. There has been no evidence of any form of blowback or nutrient contamination onto the beaches of the South Coast as a result of its placement. When the outfall was finally commissioned, a 300-meter protection zone was also established around the diffusers to ensure that you would not have persons venturing into that zone for fishing or diving or any such matter. And if there was any clear direct impact onto the reefs, I'm telling you for certain that by now the Coastal Zone Management Unit would have received calls, especially from the diving fraternity, regarding evidence of pollution, etc., being found on the reefs that are normally dived along the South Coast. And to date, we have not received any such complaints from them, and they're diving them every day. So I think that is good standing for us for dealing with the temporary outfall, and it is understood that work is underway to determine where the permanent outfall for the South Coast sewage plant will be placed, and that is work that is currently being led through the Ministry of Water Resources and Energy, and at such time, more information, I guess, from their end will be coming forward on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
You finished?
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Madam Chair. We have some lofty development aspirations in Barbados. Right now, principally, they're led by our efforts at tourism. But as we intimated yesterday, I think that tourism successes also come with some negative fallout and negative impact upon our coastal and marine environment. There's the sewage issues related to hotel activity. There are issues of infrastructural development, especially in coastal areas. There is often held, strongly held, a view that the negatives associated with our tourism successes or tourism development plans and vision are negatives to be taken very, very seriously. I would really want to hear Dr. Brewster speak to his concerns with respect to the potential relative to the marine ecosystem, and of course we're talking potential in negative terms, relative to the marine ecosystems as that flows from our efforts to develop our tourism industry and several levels. What are his concerns, strong concerns? What is the implied quantum costs to this country resulting from likely damage to the ecosystem, coral reefs, etc.? If we are faced with present danger in this context, what are the time parameters against which we are working? I ask this, ma'am, because I was reading an article with Chadwick and someone called Miku or Maiku on beach erosion in Barbados. And I'd just like to read a few lines out of the article. It says, development trends have limited the ability of Barbados's coral reefs to adapt to climate change. They've been destroyed by careless diving near shore, disposal of solid waste, indiscriminate alterations to the coastal topography, mainly from tourism infrastructural development, destructive fishing practices, anchoring boats over reefs. Recent studies by the University of West Indies concluded that there were significant signs of deterioration even up until 2007. Approximately 80% of Barbados's fringing reefs were seriously degraded, and the bank reefs on the south coast and southwest coast had decreased from 37 to 23% in a period of a decade. The article expresses some concerns as to the damage to the marine ecosystem caused by activities which are, for the most part, legitimate, some illegitimate, some in contravention of regulatory provisions. But certainly the concerns are there, and I just wanted to hear from a professional in the field, an expert with a live voice, rather than just rely on what this article says to me today. What are his concerns? What are the time parameters within which we have to operate if we have to address these issues? And what is the implied quantum in terms of costs to the Barbados economy if we don't get these matters properly addressed?
All right, thank you, sir. I think that the reality is that Barbados has, for a long time, practiced sustainable tourism development. Okay, the development process has allowed us to better ably manage the shoreline in terms of some activities that take place along the area. We've been monitoring reefs since 1983, so we have one of the longest 5-year, well, let me start again. We've been monitoring the reefs every 5 years since 1983, and we have one of the longest records within the Caribbean region of coral reef monitoring. And yes, it is noted that over time, the quality of the reefs have declined. But it must also be borne in mind that that is not just from coastal development. That is from the development taking place right across the island in general. Because, as I've repeatedly said, and as the minister has grown to understand, water flows to the sea in 2 directions, right? It flows from the sea to the land, to the coast, and it also flows from the land to the coast, both above and below ground. So when you have extensive development taking place in the hinterland, and you're discharging to the groundwater, you have a situation where that groundwater discharge is making its way eventually to the coastal zone. That level of pollution will eventually seep out into the near shore, and over time, the impact on fringing reefs was the area that was first felt in terms of visible evidence of damage. What we've been doing in the last 15, 20, 25 years is to try to ensure that wherever practicable and possible, that stress-related activity has been reduced. So with the development of the Bridgetown Sewage Treatment Plant and with the construction of the South Coast Sewage Treatment Plant, a lot of the immediate load that was found along those two sections of coastline has been considerably reduced. I think that the issues that are being described are valid. I think also that the concerns that are also being raised are also being addressed. Things like anchor damage are not something that is prolific or profound in terms of activity. Most of the time, they're accidents that take place because of poor information being transferred from the entities that provide the permissions for anchoring of vessels to take place. And sometimes when people drop their anchors in sand, the sand anchors do not actually catch and they drift, and therefore you get what we call chain sweep, which is the chain associated with the anchor sweeping over a reef and causing damage, or in other instances, people directly drop the anchor on the reef. As part of our legislation since 1998, we've been able to actively go out once we receive a report of anchor damage, and we have been able to make contact through the Coast Guard and through the port to deal with the vessels that have had that level of, that have maybe created that damage. And we go out and we assess the damage and actually can provide a quantitative value onto the damage that has occurred and pass on that information. And in some instances, mostly, you find that the people pay for the damage that they have created, which was an accident on their part. And we appreciate that contribution as best it can, but it's not that it's being done on purpose. I think the reality is that as Barbados is moving forward in terms of its approach to the level of development, especially the type of development that's going to be taking place along the coastline, it is going to become more incumbent on the administration and the property owners to become more aware as to what will be required, and therefore stringent standards and methods are going to be applied, and they will have to adhere. That's as best as I can say. Thank you.
You know, Opposition Leader, the truth is there's a Ministry of Maritime Affairs now and Blue Economy, specifically for these reasons. The reason we were created was to be able to address some of these issues. So we know those issues were there. The truth is across the world, and certainly across the Caribbean, those figures are probably the same. You're seeing 60%, 70%, 80% of the coral being destroyed by terrestrial activity, but also by climate change, but across most of the world. So what we're saying now, when we signed on to the Clean Ocean Alliance, we made a promise that Barbados obviously has its own values, but we're going in the direction where we want to monitor what goes into the ocean. There's some countries that have banned the kind of suntan lotion that tourists is using. They've banned the shampoos because they contain these, what do you call those? The plastics, these small plastics, the microbeads that actually end up in the water as well. So these are conversations that we're going to be having eventually to reduce the level of damage that is being done in that sector. We spoke yesterday about, the day before, sorry, about the work we're doing with Encrypt and how we're telling people how they have to build when they're building on the coast to be able to mitigate some of those same challenges. The Minister of Tourism is also having these same conversations about deepening the sustainability related to how we are putting out our tourism product. In fact, Barbados stands to benefit from promoting itself as a sustainable tourism product in relation to how we treat to the environment. So I think that we're still in the early stages of development, but that as we build out the plan for the blue economy, and Mr. Ward, who's sitting behind me, could perhaps speak to some of what we're doing in terms of the blue economy roadmap, that would help us figure out exactly which direction we're going to be going in the end. But these things will be addressed, Opposition Leader, and that is the reason the Prime Minister gave me the responsibility.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we have coastal building guidelines. I do not know the extent to which your ministry has had input into those guidelines, but I really would like to query what is the level of satisfaction. How satisfied are you with the degree of compliance, coastal building guidelines in Barbados?
Coastal building guidelines are part and parcel of the development application process, and those standards have been established for a long time. I think that we have been able to attain a high level of developmental standard. Most of the engineering firms that are involved in terms of coastal construction adhere to the international standards for some aspects of coastal development, and especially dealing with hurricane winds and those sort of situations. We may not have actually incorporated stuff as yet as it speaks to earthquake resilience, but definitely for hurricane and storm wind and flooding resilience, we have actually been able to do that. There has been a new policy that has been more or less rolled out over the last 2 to 3 years as well, in terms of trying to insist and ensure that ground floor plan is always left planular and open to deal with the components of potential flooding from storm surge or hurricane surge activities on most coastal properties. And we have seen in terms of villa development especially, issues that speak to what was raised before in terms of sea level rise and increased storminess and wave penetration. Some properties that can afford it are actually elevating their seaward properties to ensure that those properties are protected. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're building revetments for protection, but they're actually raising the land as a means of protecting it from potential flooding, etc. So we are very confident in the approaches that have been taken so far in terms of coastal building standards.
Honorable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I first wish to join the member for St. Peter in congratulating the Prime Minister on her vision in establishing this ministry. And the Minister, as a young Minister, for the energy he's put into this new ministry. I believe he often says that he's the first minister globally who has specific responsibility for this area, and obviously for his team and what they've done so far. My first issue, Minister, is as regards protection of the beaches for Barbadians and obviously for tourists as well. I am Member of Parliament for a coastal constituency, and of course, as has been said before, but to expand on it, the beach is part of the patrimony of Barbadians. A song has been immortalized on it almost 40 years ago by one of our main Calypsonians now, someone possessing one of the highest honors in Barbados. And you're aware, of course, Minister, that we would have met about 4 weeks ago together with the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, Minister of the Environment, on an issue which was of tremendous concern to me, where permission would have been given by the Coastal Management Unit for work to be done of an urgent nature to repair beachfront property in Weston, and but no notice was given to either myself as Member of Parliament or to the public or to the people in the area that this work was going to be done, and obviously access along the beach would have been compromised for those who use the beach, consider it their own as it is, for a few weeks. And I just wanted, to give you the opportunity to bring to the public, especially those who live on the coast, what decisions were taken arising from this, without prejudice, of course, to any legislation, that notice would be given when such developments are taking place on the coast that infringe on beach access or ability to utilize the beach by Barbadians and tourists alike, that public notice would be given before such development takes place, and the public would be told essentially how long the beach access may be compromised to their detriment, rather than just permission being granted by a department of government, in fact, without the knowledge of the ministers involved either. just in terms of governance, accountability, and transparency, that this agreement and understanding was reached. That's my first intervention.
Thank you, Minister. We did have that conversation. We met, as you said, myself, yourself, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, as well as other persons, technical staff in my ministry and technical staff in his. And we had a conversation around the beach access generally, but we spoke specifically about the area that concerns you. And I think your concern at the time, and our concern too, really, was that the work was being done and that the Member of Parliament was not informed, or the residents in the area were not properly informed. And I think we agreed at the end of the meeting to ensure that whenever these works are being done, I think Town Planning made the arrangement that whenever these works are being done, that they would communicate to the persons who live in the area the nature of the work that is to be done, the length of time that it may take, and so on. So I think we reached a consensus during the course of the meeting. Unfortunately, Minister, we came in and we found systems that have been in place long before we became ministers responsible for our respective areas. And some of these systems, from time to time, will present themselves, and when they present themselves in a way that is challenging, it gives us the opportunity to rectify some of these things. And I think at the end of that meeting, we were able to conclude not only for that particular area, but in every area where there's going to be development work on the beaches, we will inform the public through the necessary PR, maybe through GIS, maybe on CBC, maybe in the newspapers, but that the public would be informed when the work is going to be done. The public will be informed of the length of time that it would take and so on. I think the unfortunate reality around that time too was that persons took pictures and videos and posted it on social media and gave the impression that the landowner was engaging in works that would deny the average Barbadian access to the beach. And the truth is the landowner was given permission to do the work because his wall, a lot of the properties on the coast suffer severely, especially with these north swells, when the waters come in. So from time to time, they have to do the work along the beach or on the beach to get to their property. In this case, the person just wanted some boulders so that as they drove the heavy equipment onto their property or to their property, it would not damage the beach. So it had looked a lot more dangerous than it actually was. And I think we had a responsibility perhaps to communicate it. And I think at the end of that meeting, Minister, we concluded that going forward, we would rectify that level of miscommunication.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, my second intervention relates to the Western Fish Market, of course, which is adjacent to the issue which we just spoke about. The Western community and fishing is the lifeblood of this area especially, and St. James North in general. I think a good about 6,000 people in Barbados depend on the fishing industry for their livelihood. And this market was, excuse me please, was allowed to fall into disarray under the last government. And I would wish, if you allow me, Chair, to inform the public that the person who named the fish market is named after Miss Millie Eiffel, age 104, died a few days ago, and give honor to her as a person who made an outstanding contribution to the fishing industry, not only in Western and St. James North to Barbados on the whole. But Minister, we would have toured the Western Fish Market in that area. I think it was 2 Octobers ago, October 2018, you and some of your team, and you subsequently would have joined me in a town hall meeting in that area on the Western Fish Market and development in Western as a whole. You said in your opening that drawings, monies are in the estimates for drawings to be done of a new or refurbished Western Fish Market during the upcoming financial year. But there were other fish markets which had priority in terms of refurbishment from what you named. But, Minister, there are private enterprises, private sector people who are willing to help develop a Western fish market in terms of funding, people who have property development interests in the area. And therefore, I can only urge, that the drawings be done, and your ministry and myself as Member of Parliament can see about private-public sector partnerships in this. I know the United Nations Development Programme, which you mentioned in your brief as having an interest as well. They do in terms of development of fish markets and fishing resources in Barbados. UNDP was interested a few years ago, about four or 5 years ago, in terms of helping with the development as well. And therefore, I know that we could get assistance. I will certainly, Minister, as Member of Parliament, use my office to try and assist your ministry once your drawings are completed. My other intervention, Madam Chair, speaks towards Mullins and Roadview, also in my constituency, the northern part. And I know, again, from the town hall meeting your ministry would have had in December, January this year, on this, that this is an area that your coastal management unit is looking to enhance the shoreline in terms of a project and protect an area that has been eroded, what with climate change and the passages of time. And I'm wondering if, I want to give you the opportunity, sir, to speak towards this area of, and this aspect of your ministry, protection of the coast, particularly in terms of the Mullins to Roadview project.
Thank you, Minister. The Mullins to Roadview project, as you know, I think the conversations with Coastal Zone has left your constituents somewhat happy, but Dr. Brewster will address that after I speak to the issues at Western. The truth is Western is not being done in the financial year because it was not a priority. When we looked at the work needed at Western requires significant repairs. Significant. As a matter of fact, we intend to rebuild Western entirely. So this year we took a decision that with the funds we had, we could do minor work at some of the, major work comparatively at some of the other markets, but it would not have allowed us to do all we needed to do at Western. So we've been speaking to the Bridgetown Port, and they have come on board to help us do the drawings and do the necessary work for Western. Minister, I am also very happy to hear from you now that you have persons who will be willing to help us pay to do Western. Had you made that information available to me last year, we could have been doing Western since last year. The truth is I would love to bring, Western is one of those areas though, because Western is more than just a market. Western is almost like a community in of itself. It's built into the DNA of the people who live there. And for me, when we went to Western and I met with your persons there, I also saw it wasn't only the market, it was the place beside it where the fishermen are supposed to gather that is also in a state of disrepair. And we intend to make Western one of the beacons, really, like a shining example, given the space and the fact that we want to rebuild Western from scratch. We have the opportunity to build something really fantastic at Western. So even though there may be a slight delay with Western, because we're building Western from scratch, we have the opportunity to make Western perhaps one of the better looking markets and most functional markets in Barbados, and we will do so. So the port will take on the responsibility as it stands for getting the drawings done, full comprehensive drawings. Of course, Minister, I will meet with you to make sure that we have your input. We will meet with your people to make sure that we have their input as well. And certainly, I am very serious about working with the persons in that area who would be willing to come on board and help us do some more work at Western. So it wasn't an issue of priority. It was really that in terms of the costings, Western would have taken a little bit more funds and a little bit more time. but it's definitely built into our plans, and I guarantee you when Weston is constructed, you will be more than pleased with the work that we're going to do at Weston, and the persons there will be more than satisfied with the work that we do at the actual building, but also the associated buildings at Weston. So if we're able to get the drawings expedited and finished before the end of the financial year, we might be even in a position to start the work at Weston. Of course, with the support of those persons. So I wouldn't want to give the impression, Minister, I know that it is very close to your heart. You've raised it with me a few times. I wouldn't want to give the impression that it is not a priority. It really is a priority, but the extent to which we'll be able to do work at Weston will be transformative in the end. And I'll let Dr. Brewster speak to the Roadview and Mullins issue.
Let Mr. Brewster finish.
Thank you, Minister. Roadview and Mullins is a unique section of coastline in its own right along the Barbadian shoreline. I think that what we are going to be doing there is going to be transformative, not only for St. Peter's January, but for that northern section of shoreline to show what we can do in terms of environmental engineering design, and more importantly, in terms of shoreline stabilization and enhancement. Now, when you walk literally from St. Peter's Bay round the corner by Great House, you'll see that there's literally no beach running down all the way down to Mullins. And there were different reasons as to the reasons why that would have happened. And people will say that in the past there used to be beach there. But over time, what we have noticed is that there was the urgent requirement for that work to be done. So as part of the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program, as I mentioned before, we are looking to finalize the designs there now, and the designs will literally comprise of a series of offshore breakwaters, shallow offshore breakwaters that will be surface piercing, as well as some short groins, and a low-level walkway that will provide protection for the properties in the area of retreat, which is like the area between Mullins coming up to Great House. And then when you go around Great House into the Kings Beach, St. Peter's Bay area, there will be some minor modification of those existing groins and one or two offshore breakwaters there to help stabilize and enhance the shoreline. As part of the work that was going on, it must be noted at this point in time that the Great House, which is right in the corner, the pivot point, was actually undergoing significant renovation last year. And as part and parcel of that work, they openly and actively accepted to integrate the design work that we are planning to do for their section into the work that they were doing, and they took on that cost. So that has been very beneficial to us. So the design work that took place at the Great House is part and parcel of the overall design of the works that we will plan to do in the future, and therefore we will pick up and tie on in that respect. And fortunately for us as well, there were one or two houses in the immediate vicinity of Great House that were in urgent need of protection, that the property owner also agreed to provide some level of short-term property protection for them at the time. It couldn't extend the full length, but we were very grateful as well because he did volunteer to at least do those that were closest to him. And that has worked out well for us. The difficulty we've now found, to keep everybody current, is the fact that having put in those short-term protection works, people are now starting to develop. And one area in particular is of grave concern to us because that was the area that we had identified as the point of access for us to bring in the heavy-duty equipment to do some of the work that's going to take place in that area. Okay, so it means now that we have to talk with town planning to start looking to deal with potential having enforcement notices placed on these properties because the work is illegal. We haven't seen any application come in for it, and it is going to significantly impact the ability of that project to be built effectively if that access way is lost.
We can come back.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
Second. The question is that I do not report to the Honorable Speaker. I'm coming back. Progress and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requested leave to sit again.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 12:15 p.m.
Question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 12:15 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 12:15 p.m.